Joining us now, New York Times chief White House correspondent and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin back with us. And Lisa, what are some of the key differences here in this agreement versus the agreement we saw with Columbia and with Penn?
Well, let's start with the amount. Obviously is a key difference. $50 million and $200 million on top of a $21 million fine Columbia also separately agreed to. Those are very big distinctions in the amount of money. But let's talk about some of the other differences, Ariel, because Columbia got much more specific language about what the federal government would not touch. And in particular, the federal government in the Columbia Agreement says they will not micromanage faculty hiring or admissions. Here, by contrast, Brown got a much more simpler promise to desist from interfering with academic speech and curricular choices. But one of the things I want to draw your viewers' attention to is what is similar about these two things, and that is that there is an agreement in the first place. They are papered. Any member of the public can see these agreements. The one with Columbia is 22 pages long. The one with Brown is 9 pages long. That's in stark contrast to the quote-unquote settlements that the Trump administration reached with major law firms, for instance, which in some cases have been admitted to be nothing more than the tweets that President Trump himself put out about settling with these law firms. There is no paper memorializing what the agreement is. In fact, the exact terms of those agreements are sometimes contested. So the universities here have a piece of paper that the settlement is reduced to in the event that there's a later dispute about its enforcement.
That's the same thing we're seeing with tariffs, by the way. The agreement says that it's going to address the state workforce, that this money is going to be going to the state workforce. Lisa, what does that mean?
So in the Columbia settlement, the $200 million that Columbia was paying goes straight to the United States. Here, by contrast, Brown said it would pay $50 million over 10 years to state workforce development organizations, aka nonprofits, theoretically untouchable by the Trump administration. How they decided that workforce development was going to be the objective of what they were funding is another story entirely, given that the allegations here were about Brown discriminating, first on the basis of religion against Jewish students, and second, on the basis of its favorable atmosphere for transgender students. Those are the two things addressed in the settlement. So it may be that Brown's condition was, look, we'll fork up some money to get the restoration of our health research grants, but we're not going to put it in this administration's pocket. We're going to do something with it that is of benefit to the people of Rhode Island.
Lisa, Brown seems to have avoided naming an outside monitor for this deal, which is something that we saw with Columbia. It seemed to be a red line for Harvard as we start to discuss what they may make a deal on with the government. So how does an outside monitor complicate things?
Well, I think anytime you have an outside monitor of a settlement, and oftentimes courts will appoint, for example, an outside monitor where there's a consent decree, you've got somebody breathing down your neck with respect to compliance with terms. And here the agreement with Brown is fairly specific in certain respects. For example, Brown has pledged that it will do outreach to Jewish day schools to recruit more Jewish students to Brown. It says that it will commemorate the 130-year anniversary of Judaic presence at Brown's campus. All of that gets more complicated when you've got somebody who's in charge of monitoring whether or not you are complying with the terms. Now, obviously, the Trump administration can sort of look from afar as to whether Brown is complying, but nobody has anyone to report to here. And if you're a university, that's probably a term you very much care about in terms of continuing to administer your academic program.
Peter, I didn't forget about you. Harvard is still in talks about a potential deal. The New York Times is reporting that they may end up spending about $500 million. Where do those negotiations stand now, and how do these previous agreements affect what we may see shake out with Harvard?
Well, it's a great question, right? Because if you're Harvard, if you're on their board of overseers and you're looking at what these other schools have got, of course, you're going to make some comparisons, right? Of course, you're going to look at these deals and say, what's the best part of these deals that we can adopt for ourselves that we're willing to live with? And the amount of money, as Lisa said, of course, is starkly different between Brown and Columbia. That doesn't necessarily mean that Harvard's going to get away with anything like Brown did. Probably not even close to what Columbia did. Our reporting, my colleagues' reporting, indicates they're willing to talk about the $500 million, depending on what the conditions are. Harvard, of course, is the beneficiary of a lot of federal research grants, not money that goes into the pockets of Harvard administrators, to be clear, but this goes for scientific research that has benefited the country, not just Harvard. But it is obviously one of the major recipients, so the number is likely to be higher. At the moment, watching these other schools, it may encourage them to think that they should go ahead and make a deal. The Harvard got celebrated by a lot of people in academia and on the political left for standing up to Harvard at first, for standing up to Trump at first, excuse me. But they may decide that it's just worth, at this point, finding a way to make this go away if they can do it the way Columbia and Brown have.
And let's talk about the money going the other direction. According to an Axios analysis, President Trump has extracted more than $1.2 billion in settlements from powerful players in tech, media, law, and higher ed. Some critics are calling this legalized extortion by the federal government. Aside from Brown, though, has the administration outlined where all this money is going to go?
Not that I've heard, maybe Lisa knows more. I have not heard that. It's worth reminding our viewers that some of these settlements that were shown in that chart are actually personal lawsuits by Trump, not money that will go to the federal government. For instance, his settlement with CBS Paramount is money that goes into his own pocket for the use of his presidential library. In other words, it's not going to the federal government. And that's a very different thing. And by the way, that one happened at the same time Trump's own appointees on the FCC were approving $8 billion merger involving CBS's parent company, Paramount. That's a confluence of interest there that typically would be a major scandal in Washington, but seems to have gone by without a whole lot of attention. In the case of these universities, yes, he's extracting money, but it's at least not going into his own pocket or to his personal causes. On the law firms, though, some of that money has been, at least according to his tweets, as Lisa points out, that's what we have to go on. Some of that money is supposed to go to his personal political causes that he deems to be worthy, presumably conservative political causes. That's an unusual thing for a federal government, I think, to negotiate with a private entity. But this is a different kind of administration, and he is using the power of his government to really put pressure on all sorts of these major institutions that once enjoyed a great deal of independence.
You made very good distinctions there between all the different kinds of deals that we are seeing from this president and what the implications may be. Peter Baker and Lisa Rubin, thank you both.